All right, who wants to kick it off?
The dichotomy of leadership. When to mentor, when to fire. I feel like this chapter he spoke very openly on how when you know it's not your time to mentor anymore and when to fire. And that's a very thin line of the thought process because sometimes you persist and insist on someone even though you already gave them all the training, all the materials that they needed, and they will still not success in that role. And I agree with him in the beginning, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, but when you have already given them all the material, then I'm so sorry. Big hug and kisses. Sorry. XOXO. Gossip girl.
Well, obviously, in their world, they're dealing with life and death. In our world, we're dealing with missed deadlines, missed opportunities, maybe safety issues, things like that. So I would say that they are in the extreme of making that decision. And it's not easy. I mean, it's, as somebody who's had to fire people, the question I have to answer for myself before it happens is, have I actually done everything I could to make sure that they were set up for success, right? And then you also got to separate that out from the people who are just super experts at appearing to have not been set up for success. Like, you get those certain personalities where they're always able to maneuver around you and claim that somehow, oh, I didn't understand. But you got me. So, but getting really clear on the expectations all the way from starting, right, from the beginning when you're interviewing people for a position and defining what the position is and what the responsibilities are, all that's super critical, because if you haven't given a clear picture of what the responsibilities are, then it's hard to hold somebody accountable to those responsibilities. So this is another one of those situations where the better you do up front, the easier it is to deal with down the road, right? So I think that, what was his name, Rock? Like, they definitely wanted to keep that guy on the team. Like, everybody went over and above to try to keep that guy on the team. But ultimately, the decision had to get made that he wasn't right for the team. And, for him, it ended up, sounded like it worked out for him down the road that he got onto a team where he was successful. So, keeping somebody that isn't making the cut is just as much a disservice to them as it is to you in the long run, right? Like, you keep people around that don't belong, it's going to hurt you and it's going to hurt them. So
yeah, I was thinking of the same thing. It goes back to the hiring and making sure that, because that's a big move, and then obviously with all the HR stuff, it's like, it's a lot to document your way into a position where you're like, okay, why did we get our best and we're not making it? So here's what we got to do. But yeah, it just goes back to the hiring, it seems like. And then making sure we do everything that we can to set them up. But we've got to make sure that they're at a certain level before we bring them in,
Yeah.
That's what I kept thinking.
Yeah. And then the other, the other half of this chapter about the construction company, right? Having a weak superintendent and the the kind of tunnel vision that got developed by the project manager was there's nobody to replace this guy. But he wasn't really thinking clearly or about what other possibilities there were. And once they removed the obstruction, then the right person, the right circumstances showed up, right? And sometimes that's what you have to do. You just got to accept that there is a solution out there, right? They found somebody from within that they could promote, and all of the right circumstances came together, right? So the guy who got promoted was getting support from his previous boss, who was the successful superintendent that made things happen, and everything came together. So, just not doing something out of fear is always a bad option.
So what I kind of got out of this, and it's interesting getting to hear this dichotomy in the SEALs, because it's quite a bit different from the Marine Corps. But what I got out of this was make sure you are exhausting your options for mentorship before just pulling that trigger on the fire button. Not that it sounds like they had an issue with that particular piece of the dichotomy, but all the story was about Rock, so we didn't really talk about it a lot, but all of Rock's peers, they call them FMGs, I would call them boots. All the boots fucking sucked when they first were getting in, but they made sure to go through, mentor, and counsel them, and all of Rock's contemporaries did become fucking badass killing machines. It's a little interesting getting to compare SEALs to just regular like fleet guys, because you don't have the option to fire people that suck in the fleet. So long as the person is doing the bare minimum and isn't breaking the law, there's not a whole lot that leadership can do to get them out. The most you can do to get rid of people that suck is that when it comes up for time for reenlistment, you basically have your reviews of that person saying, hey, they shouldn't be allowed to reenlist. Then obviously after that, they're gone. But you sign that 4-year contract, so long as you don't do something to void that contract, you're on.
Yeah.
So it is interesting getting to hear the SEALs. Yeah, we straight up do get to fire people who don't meet our standards.
Yeah, because if he's sweeping guys' heads with his weapon and CQB stuff, then they're like, bro, you can't. That's a safety violation. Or that's what I was picturing, is this guy just doing stupid shit with his gun. I don't know what other safety violations I could. Yeah, I could see that being a problem if you're trying to move into a tight building and you got a guy that's not following protocol and keeping everyone safe.
Yeah, they're operating with a certain set of expectations, right? That you have to be able to do these things, and they did give him the benefit of the doubt. He made it through training. He had probably 90% of what he needed, but that ability to act under pressure was not something he could do. So they proved him out, and it just didn't work. Yeah. But what, one of the things that came up was, okay, well, if we let him go, we're probably going to be a guy short forever. And in construction, that's a big part of why we keep people sometimes that aren't that great, because it's like, we used to call it meat in the seat, right? It's like, well, he's just meat in the seat, but we need somebody in the seat. Yeah. Right. And then, obviously they're not your A players, but they still contribute something. But it's tough. It's not easy.
I find the balance hard, right? On the one hand, if you're too quick on the fire button, then one of the things that we're talking about is the unit morale. If they're super quick to just chop people off, and they talked about the emotional distress that probably hit Rock when he was basically getting fired. If you do that to everybody, then your whole group is like, fuck, what am I next?
Yeah.
Whereas if they had held on to Rock and they didn't fire him ever, you can also damage morale that way by like, okay, Tom's over there kicking ass and taking names, Freddie's over there just slacking off and doing nothing, but they both get treated the same. Now Tom's gonna be like, well, why the fuck am I working so hard if that dude's able to just slack off and get all the same accolades that I get?
Yeah.
That was the problem that we faced more in the fleet, is because we don't really have that fire button unless somebody does something egregiously wrong. You get what everybody refers to as the shit bags that just gotta kind of slack off and still
They're coasting. And then the higher performers are like, well, what's the point of going over and above if these guys are just going to coast, right?
Because the more over and above you go, the more work you get. Always
your reward for being good and competent is more work.
Yeah. We used to always say, sucks to be dependable.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah, but this one's a interesting chapter because this is a particular dynamic or dichotomy that's hard to nail.
Yeah.
That would be tough to balance 2 towers. When I heard 6 days, I was like, is that really that big a deal? But I guess if you're missing concrete pours and crane picks, that is a big deal.
Yeah, right. Like your plan was to service both towers with one, right? So, but it's I don't know. I've probably fired 5 people ever, and it sucks. Even when it was necessary, it's not a fun thing to do. Other than when I fired my brother.
What was your first time experience firing someone, and why did you fire them?
Well, it was my brother. It was because he was an alcoholic and was showing up to work drunk. So, so it was like, God damn it, man.
His name was
Yeah, his
Aaron.
name's Aaron.
Oh, that's it.
So, but the one that was hardest for me was at the airport, and I had a foreman who was doing some demolition on the air side of the airport, and whenever we saw cutouts, we were saw cutting out panels of concrete to replace. It was just R&R, right? Super easy. Well, anytime we ever saw cut and remove panels and it's adjacent to something that doesn't get removed, we always call it double cut. We cut the joint that's coming out, then you cut about 1 foot to 18 inches away from it so that you got some relief. Take out the 18 inches before you go after the big piece so that you don't damage the concrete that's got to stay. And this guy's name was Bill, and he was a character, like he was a strange dude, but yeah, fairly competent most of the time. Well, he went and demoed, like, I think it was maybe 5 to 10 squares that were supposed to come out. Well, he didn't double cut, so he spalled all the concrete around it, so we ended up placing like 20 squares, right? And what made it most difficult was the fact that it wasn't 100% his fault, because the project engineer that he was working with was, one of these young kids out of college, right? And convinced him, oh, we don't want to spend the money on the saw cutter double cut, And so, what sucked about the situation was I had to fire the foreman because regardless of what some engineer told him, he knew better. But the engineer didn't get fired or reprimanded because he's just an engineer, right? But I remember having that conversation with the guy's name was Brandon. I was like, you realize that he got fired because you gave him bad advice. And in those relationships, there's always this, like, it's a little gray area about who's actually in charge. Because the office, which are the engineers and project managers, on paper, they're in charge. But the reality is, out in the field, the superintendents and the foremen are in control of the work. And when those lines get blurred, shit gets fucked up and people get fired. But it's generally the guy in the field who always takes the fall, because it's just easy to say, oh, he's the one that did it. But yeah.
Well, why did the engineer get any information?
Because he was a new engineer. Again, he wasn't actually responsible. So, yeah. So
There's like this balance between the office and the field where the PM will say something and then the superintendent's like, no, fuck that, we're not doing it like that. We're gonna do it like this. And you'll get like this, it's almost like there's this good coexistence between PM and superintendent that can happen where they're on the same page and they know their bounds, and the PM will give input, the superintendent's gonna say, in my experience, usually the superintendent's been in construction for way longer than the PM, and the PM is good at computer stuff and all the scheduling and the money stuff. The superintendent may have been like a union framer or a concrete guy that rose up, and now he knows how to use a computer a little bit. He knows how to lay out and do all the stuff that the subs are doing, but he also has management skills. And I've seen superintendents, there's a delicate balance between like complete like disregard of what the PM and the office are saying. But I could see how, like, bro, why would you listen to the project engineer?
yeah, and that was exactly, his name was Bill. I was like, Bill,
Kid's green,
dude, you know better. Like, without a doubt, you know better. And this was a time where you should have stood up for yourself and argued with the 23-year-old engineer.
Yeah.
That he didn't know what the fuck he was talking about.
And just so you know, Sandy, project engineer isn't like the engineer designer. That's just a title. Like, they may have a degree in engineering, but there's like the designer level engineer and then college boy project engineer that's like usually doesn't know shit,
Basically a secretary.
Yeah, pretty much.
Project engineer.
Yeah, it's a title that gets kind of confused sometimes. They're on their way to aspire to be project manager someday.
They're on their way to aspire, oh my god.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
There's always a ladder. There's always a ladder to climb.
Sometimes they wear hush puppy shoes, and they're not. You see them out in the field, and you're like, well, you don't have your boots.
Or it's the cleanest vest and brand new boots.
Yeah. They're hopping over mud puddles, trying not to get dirty.
This guy's gonna be a problem. This guy's gonna be a problem.
I feel like that's.
Yeah, but that's okay.
No, I'm a girl. Pass.
I mean, honestly, I'm not trying to get money out there these days. Like, there was a time where every day was laundry day.
Yeah.
That kind of reflects military command structure.
Really?
So if you don't know, there's basically two pools of military members. There's commissioned officers, or just officers for short, and there's non-commissioned officers, or NCOs for short. The short difference is, the legal difference is that commissioned officers are literally commissioned by Congress. Non-commissioned officers aren't. but they get some officer power. That's why they're not commissioned officers. The short version of the actual difference is that commissioned officers went to college and have college degrees. Non-commissioned officers didn't. So your NCOs tend to be the kids who jump in right out of high school and just start fucking going for it. And your commissioned officers tend to be the ones who went through, what's the name of the fucking program? You see the college kids running around and like doing the
Oh
military
yeah,
training.
what is that called? Yeah,
It's not RTC. That's the high school version. Blanking on it, but anyway. So by the time you have, so O1 is your first like rank of officer, E1 is your first rank of enlisted. By the time your O1 and your E1 hit, your O1's been to college and your E1's just gone through boot camp, but they're effectively, in terms of experience in the military, at the same level. So your O1s tend to be leaning on your E5s, E6s for guidance, but at the end of the day, they are the enlisted officer in charge, so they're the ones that have to make the final calls and take the fall if shit gets fucked up. But project engineer versus foreman or a superintendent.
yeah.
Yes, I'd say it's the exact opposite in construction. You're not college kids gonna get fired before the college kid every time.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's just the way it goes. All right, well, anybody got anything else they want to add? No. Okay. All right, guys, well, dominate in all you do.